Hey everybody, Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com, back to recap a busy day two of the Pittsburgh Steelers rounds 2 and 3. And, I'm going to go into each individual pick here shortly, but I just have to say, I don't know if I hated day two. That's not a good way to start any draft recap, but I'm frustrated by it. Definitely frustrated by it, by just the overall approach, direction, and what you could reasonably argue, and I think the team has even really said, is kind of a look towards the future with at least two of their three selections. But we'll get into those guys here in a second. The one pick I like the most, and I'm guessing you probably like the most as well, is their second round pick 60, James Washington, the wide receiver from Oklahoma State. This pick is not a surprise. Obviously, the need for a receiver was heightened. I'd argue that post Martavis Bryant trade, receiver became the biggest need for the Steelers, whether that's offense or defense. And so you knew they were going to take a receiver today, and Washington is, I think, a really solid replacement for Martavis Bryant to play that Z receiver spot. Juju's going to stay in the slot, which, he's going to play. They all play different spots. They move around. But Juju is best in the slot. He gets a little more limited on the outside because he's not as good of an athlete, and he can't always use his football IQ and his toughness to kind of win over the middle as much as he could on the outside. I like being able to reasonably keep Juju in the slot and get most of his work there. And Washington is a guy that can be, a guy that can take the top off the defense. Now, he's not Bryant speed. He's not Sammy Coates speed. He ran a 4.54 at the combine, but that can always be deceiving. And he's a vertical threat that averaged over 20 yards per catch his senior year, averaged 19.8 yards in his career. Yes, he played in a college football system that threw the ball around a lot, but he's a vertical threat that runs by guys. And I thought, Randy Fichtner, Steelers' new offensive coordinator, talking about the pick, kind of said it well, that he plays a consistent time speed. He's never playing slower. He never gets worn down. He liked his conditioning. And when you talk about conditioning with Mike Tomlin, that's such a key word, a buzzword for Tomlin. The best conditioned players are the ones that are most successful. Those are the guys that in the fourth quarter, when you're tired and everyone's kind of worn down, they're playing the same speed and they're wearing defenses down. You look at Antonio Brown, obviously AB has success in a million different ways, but one of the things that separates him from opposing cornerbacks and separates, Brown separates himself from other receivers is his conditioning, his work ethic, and you're getting the same guy in the first snap as you are in the last snap, and that makes him just a even more of a headache for DBs to deal with, because you can never take a play off because AB's going the same speed every single rep. And I'm not saying Washington is at an AB level, almost nobody is, but you have the same idea where you have good conditioning that's going to allow you to play at your max potential rep to rep, and you're not going to get a variance with that, and that's obviously going to be important. So, I think it's a good pick. I didn't know much about Washington until the Senior Bowl, and I saw him down there for the 3 practices, and he had a really strong week. His body control, ability to track the football, win vertically, and that shows up on his actual tape as well. I definitely am going to go back and watch him again. I saw a couple games on him. I didn't write the scouting report on him. Andrew Miley did that, so I didn't have the actual the report with everything kind of broken down, but I'll definitely go ahead and get started on that tonight here, Friday night. But it's a good pick. It fills the need. Is he going to be Bryant right away? Probably not, but I thought of the options at receiver. He was definitely one of the candidates. Would he have been my exact pick? Maybe not. I kind of like Deshaun Hamilton more. But again, I think Hamilton would have been more of a slot guy, and I think Washington is more of an outside guy. And if you want to keep Juju inside, which is my preference for the most part, get his majority of his reps inside, then having Washington as that Z is a smart move. So Randy Fichtner talked about his toughness, his competitiveness, running his 40 both at his pro day and at the combine. Not a lot of guys do that. Usually they'll do it either one or the other. If they run at Indy, they're not going to run at their pro day and just focus on drills. But you have Washington out there wanting to prove himself and give max exposure to scouts. Steelers had dinner with him at his pro day, which we knew about, reported on back when it happened. So you get a good chance to know the person. And overall, I'm happy with the pick. I'm not going to say I love it, but I think it's a good pick. It fills an obvious need, and it's nice to get that guy who's probably going to start week 1, to be honest. I mean, Juju could get working 2 receiver sets, and in 11 personnel, Juju kicks inside, Washington plays outside. We'll see what happens. Obviously, that's a ways away. But you're going to see a guy that's going to get heavy snaps for sure. Again, second round picks, they do not sit. Now, I said this with Juju last year, even though Eli Rogers was in the room. Second round picks, they do not sit. They play right away. You got to get them on the field. And I expect James Washington to get on the field right away, make an impact on this Pittsburgh Steelers team. So that's the good. And then things got a little different. Steelers trade up, I think 3 spots officially, 79 to 76, to get Mason Rudolph, James Washington's quarterback. So they get the receiver from Oklahoma State. They get the quarterback from Oklahoma State. They trade with, I believe, the Seattle Seahawks. They're going to give up pick 220 in the 7th round this year to do so, to move up those 3 spots to get Rudolph. And I'll start with this, is I didn't see Rudolph falling this far, and maybe that's just the hype of the quarterbacks, and people thought Rudolph could be a first-round pick, and I think generally the way it goes is just always 1 or 2 quarterbacks that get hyped up way more than what the reality is. You can go through the list from several years. Tom Savage is one that comes to mind. The people thought could have gone super high, and he was, I think, a mid-round quarterback, and you could come up with 10 other examples, I'm sure. But you know my thoughts on quarterback, and this doesn't change because he's a Pittsburgh Steeler. I'm against the idea of a quarterback until you need to get Ben's heir, in a short-term fashion where you feel like he's going to be playing in 1 or 2 years. And so I'm obviously frustrated and not particularly happy with this pick. Now I will say I think it's better to get him in the 3rd round than burn out a first-round pick on a quarterback. I mean, there's that, and I understand they like Mason Rudolph, and I said it before. If they were going to draft a quarterback, it's Mason Rudolph. That's the guy they like the most. I learned that at the Senior Bowl. So the fact they targeted Rudolph is not a surprise to any of us, and you do get some other picks that are going to help you right away. What Terrell Edmonds can do in dime, what James Washington can do, which we talked about. But it's obvious Mason Rudolph's going to be sitting for quite some time, ideally at least, because if he sits, that means Ben's healthy and still playing, which is the goal. The best case scenario for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, I've talked about wanting to be in that win now mode, and this team's so close, and obviously a guy like Mason Rudolph does not help you get over the edge. Doesn't help you on offense, doesn't help you on special teams. I'm not saying they had to pick an inside linebacker or position X or position Y, but anybody else would have at least given you something in year 1, year 2, year 3, and there's a chance Rudolph gives you nothing to very little in year 1, year 2, year 3, and if Ben plays the next 3 years, potentially more, and yes, potentially less, but if he plays the 3 years that he's basically talked about, that means Rudolph would get, in theory, 1 year to show what he's got. And yes, there could be chances for spot starts in between, and if there's an injury and whatever happens there, but I'm not exactly saying and planning on getting Rudolph playing time and hoping that there's an injury so I can evaluate my 3rd round pick from 2018. Not really the goal of the plan or anyone's thought of what's ideal. So, I understand that they like Rudolph, and if they think he's the heir, then I can understand that point. I said it before, I won't be happy with the quarterback. I'll understand the point, but I'm certainly not happy with it. Just one of the guys that can help you win now. And, obviously Rudolph is not going to do that. And, and again, my thoughts on the quarterback position. The other interesting thing with the selection of Rudolph is just what happens with the quarterback room. Randy Fichtner, and this is obvious, but Randy Fichtner admitted, this team's not carrying 4 quarterbacks. Maybe that would have happened in the past, and 10, 20 years ago. Doesn't happen today. You carry 3, and some teams only carry 2. Now Pittsburgh's going to keep 3, but who are the 3? You got Ben, you got Rudolph, you got 2 dogs, 1 bone for Landry Jones and Josh Dobbs. My initial reaction was that Landry Jones is the odd man out, because I don't see this team dumping Dobbs after just 1 season, and I think if you draft Rudolph in the 3rd round, which is still pretty high, you expect him to become the backup quarterback, because also if someone goes down, you need to start some evaluation process on Mason Rudolph. So my initial thought is that Landry Jones is going to be the odd man out. I think he's been a capable backup. I've talked about some of the good things he's done for the Steelers, but do you dump the guy that is maxed out, or do you keep Dobbs, who you envision to be in the next Landry Jones basically? And now the Dobbs has a year under his belt, can go through another training camp. It's not spinning as much for him. That would make more sense to be able to keep Dobbs under contract longer. Landry Jones at one point hadn't played a snap, and eventually he gets elevated and plays the snap. So if you go into that with either Dobbs or Rudolph, then you learn about those guys the way you learn about Landry Jones. Hopefully that makes sense. But could it be Dobbs? I mean, it could be. They're certainly not going to cut anybody after the draft. They're going to take them all to camp. Those are your 4 quarterbacks. I don't think they're going to bring in a UDFA. And then you see what happens. Of course, an injury could change things. Any of those 3, and that could shake things up. It's happened in the past with Bruce Gradkowski's been injured before in camp and been out for the year. So you protect yourself that way by carrying all four. But if you assume all three stay healthy behind Ben, then I think if it was my guess, Landry Jones is the odd man out. But we'll see what happens. Either way, it's not an ideal situation because either you cut Landry Jones, who you have a good deal of comfort in as a backup because what he's done in spot starts and has a leadership quality and kind of a calming influence on this team that's been talked about and referenced multiple times, even if his physical talent is average to below average. Or you cut Josh Dobbs, who you drafted in the 5th round the year before, and now he's out on the street. So either way, it's not really a great situation from that standpoint. Now, does that prevent you from drafting a guy like Mason Rudolph if you really like Rudolph and you think he can be the heir? No, you live with it, and I get that, but there's a consequence to it that's obvious and isn't going to be the best, the most fun thing to do, either cutting Landry Jones or cutting ties very early on Josh Dobbs. But again, they'll carry R4 to camp, and you see what happens, and let guys battle it out, and that'll help the competition. Cream rise to the crop. I mean, that's a good consequence to come from it. But to take Rudolph in the 3rd, to trade up for him, even if it was just a 7th, you knew you liked him, but my thoughts, and I'm far from thrilled from taking Mason Rudolph. Then finally, with their 92nd overall pick, the true 3rd rounder they had, because the other one was what they got with the Martavis deal. They take an offensive lineman, which is not a huge shock to me. I mean, it was in the realm of possibility, but certainly not what I expected. Without addressing an inside linebacker and maybe an edge guy or a running back spot or someone else who could again help you right away. They get Chukwuma Okorafor from Western Michigan. And I'll admit, this is a guy I don't know a lot about. This is a guy that's played right tackle. He played right tackle his, I think, freshman year or sophomore year at Western Michigan, then kicked over to the left side and was one of the guys that kept Taylor Moton, who was a really good, I think, a 2nd-round pick last year, I want to say, had kept Moton on the right side. And so the last 2 years, Okorafor has played on the blind side. From what Mike Munchak was talking about, this sounds like a very much a developmental pick, a guy that does not have a ton of football experience, has played the football for the past 6 years, which is relatively small for a college football player, and basically just said, Munchak did, that this is a developmental guy that has the tools and the size, he's got the length, I mean, he looks the part, but has, a long ways to go, and in one way, Munchak viewed that as a good thing, because there aren't as many bad habits with him, which is true and fair. But means that this is a guy you wouldn't expect to make an impact. Obviously, with the state of the offensive line, the 5 that are locked in, and even as a backup spot, you have some talented guys that could play multiple spots, whether that's Gerald Hawkins or Matt Filer on the outside. So, you're not getting anything from him in year 1. You're not getting anything from Mason Rudolph in year 1. Your Steelers tackles are pretty much set, for the next couple of years, Villanueva and Gilbert. Now, there's an injury, you could have a guy that comes in and there's value in that. We saw that with Chris Hubbard. So you have, starting in 2019, the chance for a guy like Okorafor, to be able to come in and make an impact in that kind of role, which is not a bad thing. There's huge value in that. I mean, there's no question about it. But again, you go back to the frustration of, where is the year 1 impact? How does he help you win today? And the answer is he doesn't. And again, there's no special teams value either. So you don't even get that kind of, at least, ability to look at a third phase guy that can come in and make some impact plays for you on the coverage or the return team. So again, that has me a little frustrated. It's surprising the inside linebacker was not addressed within the first 4 picks. Only one defensive player taken in the first 4 picks. That's surprising as well. I guess the thought process is for the Steelers that twofold. That they want Bostic on the field every snap. They feel like he can do that, which he's done in the past. That was one of the things that was attractive about John Bostic, is that he has been a true 3-down guy, a never miss a snap in all situations player, and they just feel like, especially with this communication ability, they don't want him coming off the field. And if you lose Bostic and he's rotating out, then who's coming in? Who's your signal caller? How do you delegate those roles? Is that going to create more problems? Which it probably will if you're asking a rookie to do that or asking somebody else to be your communicator, which is fair. And then the other part is, again, I said it before, they're a lot higher on Tyler Matakevich than 95% of the Steelers fan base is. He was the backup linebacker at both the Buck and Max spots for last year, and he would have been Shazier's replacement had Matakevich himself not gotten hurt with that shoulder injury against the Bengals that kept him out as an only special teams player that wouldn't let him play defense. And you know, when they talked about the inside linebacker position earlier this year, Kevin Colbert was discussing it, and he kind of made it a point to mention, you know, we still have Medikevich. You know, just kind of reminding guys of that. So again, I think there's a lot of confidence in him. I'm not saying I agree with that. There's definitely a chunk of me that does not agree with that, but I'm just saying that's their thought process. Saying, you know, Bostic's going to be an every snap guy. We think Medikevich can be a top backup for us, and maybe they just didn't like the guys that were on the board. But yeah, definitely surprising that it hadn't been addressed. I thought it would be. I was pretty confident you were going to see a receiver and inside linebacker pick today. Obviously, a receiver came in, inside linebacker did not. We'll see what happens on day 3. They'll have 2 fifth-round picks and a 7th, so obviously no 4th-round picks. They'll be waiting a while for them to make their first selection, and so the draft pool could get, you know, withered down even more. And we'll see what happens with day 3. It's hard to even say what direction they'll go. It's going to be a value thing, not necessarily a need thing. You're not really picking for need once you hit, you know, round 5. But we'll see what they do. So, you know, to sum things up, the Washington pick I liked. Everything else I'm, you know, very skeptical of, and wondering where the year 1 impact is going to be. But let me know your thoughts on day 2 of the NFL draft with James Washington and Mason Rudolph and Chukwuma Okafor. And you know, your thoughts on the pick. Maybe you have a different feeling on all 3 of those guys, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts below, whether you're watching on YouTube, Steelers Depot, or following me at Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.